So welcome to the session that will look in particular at the Silk Road and its context, particularly in relation to private sector development. But before we get into boring stuff that as economists like to do, we have the luxury to have Peter Frankopan, a very distinguished historian from Oxford University, who will give an introductory speech about the Silk Roads. In fact, the speech is based on his book, I imagine. He didn't know I had here, but it's here. He's shy, so he won't say, but it's a great book, so do read it. I found it very, very interesting. But without any further ado, let me ask Peter to deliver his keynote speech. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mattia, for your very generous introduction. I didn't know you had my book, but thank you for bringing it all the way, because it's quite heavy. It's a real honor to be here in Astana. Thank you, the organizers, for bringing me here and also for honoring me by being on such a distinguished panel this morning. It's true, I'm not a policymaker or a lawyer or a banker or a politician, which is, I think, the general constitution of the people speaking here at this conference. I'm a historian, so my job is not to make suggestions, but the job of a historian is to provide context, but also to observe and give an interpretation of what is going on. And I think it's important, as all of us realize, to underline that we are living in a world in an age of transition. And I think one needs to understand, for me anyway, the world that's going on around us in the context of much wider rhythms of changes of global trading patterns, shifts of power, and changes in the center of the world's gravity, both commercial, economic, fiscal, political, and even military. It's striking to me that yesterday, at the many interesting sessions I went to, there's very little historical context given to the kinds of questions that are being considered here, which seems to me both interesting and maybe something of a shame. I suppose it was typified by the fact that a very distinguished economist yesterday said that for him, when he means history, he means from before 1999. For me, in my faculty at Oxford, we consider modern history to start in the year 527 AD, 1500 years ago. So one's perspective of what is normal and what is interesting differs wildly. As I said, it seems that we live in a world that is unfamiliar. Threats of Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism, military confrontation, rises of China, what this means for the region and what this means for global economies seem important. But it is fundamental that these questions that are being considered, including private investment rights and private sector investments, are not new. We can convince ourselves, and my children convince themselves, that everything they see is new and better than in the past. But the kinds of challenges that are being faced today in Kazakhstan, across the region of Central Asia and beyond, are extremely familiar ones. These rhythms of change are nothing unusual. And I write in my book about Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism in the 10th century, where a world had to adapt to a problem that we see in the beginning of the 21st century. I write about slowdowns of the Chinese economies and of the impact on global trade in the Ming era in the 15th century, where we can learn a great deal, I think, from seeing what happens when an economy overcooks, overheats, and where shortages in monetary supply have impacts many thousands of miles away. It seems that economists can be quite quick to dismiss history because they consider there isn't data that can be sufficiently mined, but there is plenty of material that can allow these conclusions to be reached. My particular focus on the Silk Roads has been to try to demonstrate that these are not peripheral, exotic regions that have some secondary importance in the world, but they have been fundamental since antiquity. And they've been fundamental not just until 1500 or so, when the rise of the West started to take place, but they've been the world's central nervous system for more than 2 millennia, along which exchanges of goods, exchanges of people, ideas, languages, religions, diseases, pathogens, human DNA, flora and fauna have been exchanged. And this significance is not in the world's distant past, it's on the world of today. And although we consider Silk Road as being something new and a signature Chinese investment and foreign policy program, of the early 21st century. In many ways, control of these Silk Road regions, control of their commodities, oil and gas in particular, has been one of the great stories of the last century. We tend to think of the 20th century in terms of the great confrontation between communism and fascism, but in fact one could make a case to say that Western interventions in Iran, in Iraq, Soviet interventions in Central Asia, including in Kazakhstan, have shaped the world that we are trying to understand today. And it could be dangerous to look only in terms of global GDP distributions without trying to put them within a wider context. So today, the kinds of things we're talking about, the relationships between developed and developing economies, or now I know economists like to call them advanced and emerging economies, I think needs to be seen within a context where this shift and the changing economies is entirely normal. And 500 years ago, it was Western Europe that was an undiversified, unstable, and flawed system of economies, where those kinds of growing pains, now going through in Central Asian states and beyond, we can really learn from. You can see how it is that, that countries have emerged and how they've managed to transplant ideas and to develop their economies. So what the challenges facing the 21st century here that you're looking at Astana, there are multiple data sets, multiple references from the past that one can look at. And those kinds of questions about political structures that we think of today as being non-advanced are ones that the West has had to learn. So once upon a time in the West, we had prevention of competition. We had short-term fiscal and monetary policies. We had disjointed decision-makings that allowed problems to exacerbate themselves. And some of these things, I think, are questions that we can look at in the modern world. So the world that we'll talk about today of Central Asia and Kazakhstan is within this context of much wider themes, within a context where Central Asia is one part of a puzzle, one part of a jigsaw that is deeply connected to China, to Russia, to the other Central Asian states, and some of the financial institutions sitting on the stage with me today. And the primary question that we'll look at this morning is about the choices of investor. And second, the anticipation of what consequences that choice might have. And those are not simple questions, because what history will teach you is that the distinction between a private and a state investor is never clear. And today's private investor may not be tomorrow's private investor. The role of the state and the private sector in eliding their interests is something that history is very rich in its examples with, whether it's from seeing the maritime states of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa in the Middle Ages, or seeing the kinds of problems that were triggered by private sector investors into India and China in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. There is a trajectory here that one needs to anticipate. And I think that the biggest question that any historian always must look at, as I come to draw to an end, is about timing pressures. The compression of timing today is, we're looking at Kazakhstan that looks very different, and Central Asia looks very different to how it did 2 years ago. Much more challenging. The prices of energy, fossil fuels, the kind of system stresses look very different to how they did 2 years ago. And my observation, I think, starting this discussion would be that the kinds of answers that are being offered today and yesterday at the panels that I listened in on look very different to me to the questions and the answers that were given 2 years ago. And that should fill an economist, a policymaker, a lawyer, and a historian with some anxiety, because you are always reacting to events. And when you react to events, you make short-term decisions. And if you're in the process of trying to make long-term plans about private investment and private sector investment, or about major Silk Road investment by the One Belt, One Road initiative through China, it's very important to always remind yourself of the longer context. So I think that's where I come to the end with my initial discussion. These gentlemen and ladies on the panel alongside me will take a different view, I think, on where they will try to give advice in terms of private sector investment. But it's very difficult to judge 2016 versus 2014. You'd have different answers in 2008 and 15 years ago. But I will guess that if you're trying to plan for a world in 15 years ahead or in a generation ahead, you will have different answers to the ones that will allow you to consider what Kazakhstan's 6-month, next quarter's results will look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this perspective that you gave us, which is, I'd say, very different from the typical angle we come from. I think the perfect following to your introduction is from Tatyana Valovaya. Tatyana is a member of the Eurasian Commission, and perhaps the Eurasian Commission is one of the institutions that incorporates the sort of ideas that were at the heart of the Silk Roads from the very beginning in the best possible way. So, Tatyana, can you give us and share with us your perspective? Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Но я, наверное, воспользуюсь возможностью, которую дал Питер, и начну тоже с истории. Потому что история это действительно позволяет нам видеть не только прошлое, но и видеть будущее. И, наверное, действительно, вот, Питер, вы начинаете свою книгу с того, что говорите, что еще мальчиком на карте нашли интересный город Баласагун. И этот город Баласагун, он теперь находится на карте на территории Евразийского экономического союза в Киргизии. Поскольку действительно история Центральной Азии, история Шелкового пути сегодня трансформировалась, по сути дела, в предысторию Евразийского экономического союза и в предысторию проекта «Новый пояс Шелкового пути». И действительно, история здесь очень и очень важна, потому что, по сути дела, Шелковый путь в значительной степени не просто соединял Европу и Азию, он и интегрировал Евразию, центры Евразии. Но еще даже до Шелкового пути этот регион тоже неоднократно был в едином экономическом, политическом союзе. Достаточно вспомнить, я всегда говорю, что первым, наверное, интегратором и первым руководителем интеграционного евразийского объединения была легендарная царица Томирис, которая победила Кира Великого еще в VI веке до нашей эры. Поэтому у истории этого региона действительно очень богатое прошлое. И я уверена, что многие уроки, конечно, для нас очень и очень важны. Поэтому, если говорить о том, что сегодня происходит в этой части земного шара, в этой части Евразийского континента, я бы сказала, наверное, что да, действительно, сейчас на слуху две инициативы. Евразийский экономический союз и инициатива экономического пояса Шелкового пути. Причем я уже вот говорила вчера на форуме, мне кажется, что не случайно об инициативе «Новый пояс Шелкового пути» стали говорить вот чрезвычайно активно в последний год. Хотя сама инициатива была выдвинута Китаем еще в 2013 году и здесь была озвучена в Казахстане впервые. Мне кажется, что это не случайно в последний год, потому что год назад был выдвинут проект сопряжения двух инициатив Евразийского экономического союза и нового пояса Шелкового пути. Именно с того момента на евразийском пространстве к этой инициативе стали относиться сверхсерьезно и заинтересованно. О чем сейчас вот мы в рамках Евразийского экономического союза обсуждаем? Вот идея сопряженности. Действительно, мы сейчас понимаем, что эти два проекта – это не конкуренты, это не альтернативные проекты для Евразии или для Центральной Азии, это две взаимодополняющие инициативы. Но, конечно, нам еще предстоит сделать видение вот этой сопряжения этих двух проектов и, конечно, в значительной степени отталкиваясь от прошлого. И в этом плане я вот бы хотела сказать, вот какое видение этого сопряжения, этого будущего могло бы быть. С одной стороны, конечно, новый пояс Шелкового пути – это прежде всего физическая дорога. Это физический маршрут из Азии в Европу, из Европы в Азию через центр Евразийского континента. И, конечно, здесь нам надо очень много подумать о том, и здесь как раз роль частных инвесторов совершенно новых очень важна, это о том, как физически обустроить этот путь, как связать транспортные коммуникации, современные высокотехнологичные коммуникации, как обеспечить логистику и так далее. Это очень важная тема для того, чтобы действительно сюда пришли частные инвесторы. Но в то же время вот эта инициатива, наверное, гораздо шире. Это не просто физический путь. для того, чтобы продукция производилась в центре Евразии, поступала в Азию, поступала в Европу, чтобы европейские товары пошли по этому пути в Азию, азиатские в Европу, наверное, нужно создавать безбарьерное пространство. И в этом плане старый шелковый путь, он тоже дает достаточно большое количество уроков. Я очень часто видела, вот как говорится, старый шелковый путь в разных странах Евразии. И в Киргизии, и в Казахстане, и в Армении, и в Турции, и в Иране. И что мы там видим? Мы видим, во-первых, огромные крепости, которые стояли на ключевых точках этого шелкового пути, поскольку местные князья, бароны и так далее контролировали этот путь и взимали на этом пути традиционные налоги. То есть действительно, несмотря на то, что путь был, для того, чтобы его пройти, надо было еще преодолеть значительное количество барьеров вот таких экономического характера. И мы на территории этого пути видим огромное количество караван-сараев, которые представляли из себя, по сути дела, огромные укрепленные крепости, потому что путь не был безопасен. И для того, чтобы обеспечивать безопасность, надо было прилагать усилия. И то есть мы должны понимать, что если мы хотим создать новый шелковый путь и объединить действительно вот центр континента, связать Азию, Евразию, Азию и Европу через Евразию, нам надо приложить силы для того, чтобы создать вот безбарьерную и безопасную среду. Евразийский экономический союз самим фактом своего существования уже уменьшил количество разделительных линий в центре Евразии. Теперь между Китаем, например, и Европейским Союзом только две границы с Евразийским Союзом. И это уже большое преимущество. Но мы, наверное, должны думать и о том, что как и вот эти границы в какой-то степени уменьшить их важность. Мы, наверное, должны думать о возможности формирования общего экономического пространства, которое могло бы объединить страны Евразии, Евразийский экономический союз и государства, которые сегодня принадлежат к Шанхайской организации сотрудничества, возможно, АСЕАН и так далее. И точно так же думать и об общем экономическом пространстве между Евразийским экономическим союзом и Европейским союзом. Вот тогда в центре Евразии появится некая безбарьерная среда, и весь континент рано или поздно придет действительно к такому унифицированному общему экономическому пространству, которое даст толчок экономическому развитию и процветанию. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Tatyana, because not only you made some very interesting points, but you also proved that economists sometimes do read history, and they do know a little bit about history. So thank you for holding up the flag of the economists here. You mentioned something that I thought was very interesting, which is the link that Peter also made, which is the link to private investors and investment choices. Interesting to hear from Peter that these are not choices that we're making for the first time. Investment choices in this region and along the Silk Roads have been made for thousands of years. But you did point to the role of the private sector. And this is a little bit what I thought we would do in this panel, which is to think very hard about what do we think the private sector will look like in the future along the Silk Roads that are being built now, and what are the big obstacles that we see for private sector investors to actually be more present in this region, which is actually being starved of private capital for now many, many years. And I think that's a great question for us to turn to the EIB, the European Investment Bank. So Jan Vapaavuori, you're Vice President for the European Investment Bank, you are Minister of the Economy in Finland. Can you give us your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning for everyone. I think coming back to the keynote speech, I think the question of the relevant time horizon is a very interesting one. I mean, for some of us, it's maybe the next quarter. For some, it's the next generation. For some, it's the last 2,000 years. For an international financial institution like the EIB, the long-term financing institution of the European Union, it's maybe roughly 10 to 20 years, taking into account that the average maturity of our loans is roughly 10 years. It's certainly true that the constant change and uncertainty are ever present in today's world, and that the predictability of global developments from both an economic and a political perspective has substantially diminished during the last years. However, I think as important it is to understand the rapid change, it's also to realize that everything is not changing. I mean, certain megatrends, now I have the time horizon of the next 10, 20 years, including urbanization, digitalization, and the tackle against the climate change are certainly not losing importance. Due to that, issues like innovation, smart infrastructure, green economy, and booming entrepreneurship will remain as key economic drivers of the economies around the world. All this needs substantial investments, which we, among others, are financing. To take an example from Europe today, the investment in Europe has hardly reached the pre-crisis level 2007, even if interest rates are at an all-time low and liquidity is ample. I think that this clearly demonstrates that liquidity alone is not enough. There has to be confidence among the market participants and willingness to take risk. I think that stable and predictable business environments, high level of skills and competencies of the labor force, as well as business-friendly regulatory frameworks are certainly gaining importance as a competitive advantage in today's world. The quality of the strategic infrastructure in a broad sense, an economy run in a sustainable way, and the level of diversification are not losing their importance, but the opposite, also from the point of view of the investments and them who are financing them. Let me shortly conclude with some words about our role here in Kazakhstan. The EIB actively supports SMEs and private sector development through local banks. At the same time, being the world's largest provider of climate-related finance, we place particular emphasis on investment supporting climate action projects. We see an increased role for private sector participation in enhancing the competitiveness of the Kazakh economy. This could be achieved, and here I come back once again to the keynote speech, for example, in form of private-public partnerships and project finance, where the EIB has a long-term experience in Europe and beyond. I think that combining the best of both the public and the private sectors will be key also in the Kazakhstan's quantum leap into a sustainable and diversified economic model in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now let's go from Luxembourg back to the core of the Silk Roads and ask Dmitry Pankin, who's the chairman of the Eurasian Development Bank, how this newly established bank sees the opportunities, particularly in relation to private sector. Dmitry.
Thank you, Romani. I think I just would like to follow our story about relationship between public and private role in financial area. In fact, it's a very interesting question. We see now rising new bank like Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, New Development Bank, BRICS Bank. So why? What's happening? Why we have such a serious growth in multilateral development bank? I think we need to maybe to understand 2 points. First of all, crisis, financial crisis 2008-2009, and one of the biggest result of this crisis, we have more tightening regulation, more strict requirement for commercial banks in order to take risk. We have Basel III requirement, we have new Volcker rules in United States. What's the result of all this new regulation? Of course, banking system now become more safe. Of course, new capital requirements have very positive impact in global financial system as this global financial system become more safe. That's fine, but other result, it's kind of fighting for quality of assets. We see that many investors try to cut their position with emerging markets, try to withdraw money from funds that from emerging markets funds and to invest in high quality assets, AAA assets. So capital is going back in the United States, in Europe, and question is who will finance all the projects in emerging market in developing worlds? And one of the answer for this question is emerging of new development bank and rise of existing banks. Maybe a second point, if we see new these new emerging banks, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is based in Beijing, and New Development Bank is based in Shanghai. So maybe this is a second point. One of leading force in growing of this bank is China. So for China is a serious question where to invest a huge balance in Chinese government funds and try to diversify these assets again, go out of US treasuries and to invest more in kind of real projects. This is, I think, second story that is under a new bank development. And in that case, question is, what will be the role of these new development banks and existing multilateral banks in financial environments? Typical answer is that this bank need to finance infrastructure. We have a huge demand for infrastructure project in Asia, and so we need additional capital and additional banks. But if we try to analyze some figures, we see that 70% of all infrastructure expenditure is financed through budget. And if we analyzed some figure for 2014, 2015, around 1% of all infrastructure spending is financed by multilateral development bank. So from first appearance, it's very tiny figure, but in that case, what's the real role? Why we are talking about multilateral development bank? I think there are some points, some issue. First of all, 1%, it's just general, it's a general figure, it's in the whole world, it's a 1%. But if we take some particular country, especially in our region, we have a different story. In Armenia, for example, 26% of all infrastructure expenditure is financed through multilateral development bank. In Kyrgyzstan, 17%. In Tajikistan, 19%. So in such country, this bank could play a very serious role in financing infrastructure development. Second point, I think, it's role of multilateral development bank. It's not only just provide money. It's kind of stamp for quality. If European Bank for Reconstruction and Development or World Bank starting to finance this project, it means that this project is verified, the very qualified team analyzed all question all problems related with particular project, and it's possible to finance this project but by other market participant, and in that case role of this bank is kind of anchor and kind of signal for commercial bank that's possible to finance this project. And this is, I think, important point. And again, another point, it's a possibility to provide project preparation. Typically, development bank has a very substantial fund for technical assistance for project preparation. And again, this is a serious question in our existing world because we have a lot of demand for spending, a lot of demand. We need billion of money, but if we are trying to analyze real project, typical situation that it's only wished how to spend money, but not real project. It means not real calculation of all risk, all economic assessment, how investor could benefit from the project, how investor could return invested money in this particular project. And in that case, all project preparation done by a professional team in multilateral development bank is very valuable. And for us, our bank is not, we have no such assets, of course, like European Investment Bank or like a World Bank. And again, here it's a question, how could we cooperate with other banks? How many multilateral banks could survive in one area? Do we compete or do we collaborate? I think it's not a kind of black and white picture. We cannot say that we have a very peaceful world and we have no competition, no problems between many development banks. Of course, we have to some extent competition. It's very interesting to find interesting project and very difficult to find. And in some cases, we are competing with other development banks. But again, we are collaborating. It's very important for us to find partner in order to risk sharing and to collaborate with other banks. So we have some typical example in Armenia, in Kyrgyzstan. If we are financing a road project, hydroelectric project, typically we are sharing risk with World Bank, with Asian Development Bank. And I think for the future, especially in Kazakhstan, for us it will be very interesting to work with existing bank like EBRD, like World Bank, and find a way how it will be possible to cooperate with a new established bank like, as I told, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, new bank in Shanghai. So this emerging of this bank is kind of challenge for the future, and it will be very interesting to see how maybe official declaration that this bank will be transparent, will use best international practice, how reality will be, and generally speaking, we are ready to cooperate with other banks in financing infrastructure project in Central Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dmitry, for an interesting overview of the role of your bank and the challenges it faces and the need for collaboration, which I think all of the speakers so far have emphasized. Now, let's now fly to the other side of the Silk Roads and go for a second to East Asia, where the Asian Development Bank is based. And perhaps we can ask Wencai Zhang to tell us how the Silk Roads and the involvement of the private sector in the Silk Roads look like when you look at them from the Far East. Wencai.
Thank you, Mattia. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. This is my second time to participating in this very important forum. Last year I was here. This time I'm very happy to be back. I think these topics are very important, and certainly if you look at the role of the private sector in a region, certainly we want to see the big role by the private sector. Of course, public sector will continue to play a very important role in the coming years. It depends on each country's circumstances and development stage. But certainly, in general, I see that private sector will be the key driver for the growth in the medium, long term for the region. I think no doubt about that. And I think colleagues all know the difficulties this region are facing, right? And look at this global economic environment and also the regional challenges and individual countries' challenges. I don't have time to go into detail, but I just want to see that. So we needed to get a solution for sustainable, inclusive, and even strong growth in the coming years. Some of member countries had a very low growth this year, 1% or 2%. In one country even will have like a negative growth for this year. So I can in general for the Central Asia for the 8 countries, 5 Central Asia and 3 Caucasus countries, based on our ADB's projection for growth it's about 2.1%. This year, I just give you the pictures. So how we address these challenges in a region and in a context such as global and regional and individual country circumstances. So certainly we need to look for the sources of growth. And so I think how can we promote developing the private sector in each of our member countries in the region, in the Kazakhstan and other neighboring countries. So, Mattia, you asked me a question about, all of us about a question about what are the major, barrier or something difficulties for the development. We Asian development has been, working with our regional member countries for many years, particularly after joined the ADB after the, 1991, that Kazakhstan joined ADB in 1994. So that over the last, more than 20 years, that we see a lot of changes in the region, and we also see a lot of achievement by the member, but still we see a lot of daunting challenges. So, look at this region, right? It's relatively geographically remote to the seaport. That also many countries are landlocked countries, right? They don't have, they need to look for the way to the market, particularly to the bigger market in other parts of the world. And this is, the challenges. But we also have a very relatively small population in the region, right? For 5 Central Asia countries, altogether have like a population of maybe 66 million or less than 70 million populations altogether. So how if you want to develop a private sector, right? You need the reasonable kind of size of the market here. So how they want to see the market. So how can we address these kind of things? So we want to see the more that physical integration among the member countries. Yeah, we also want to see more trade policy dialogue and trade facilitation, even trade liberalization one day. Many countries want to join, and some countries already joined WTO. Some countries are still looking for join the WTO. And also some countries already joined the EU. My colleagues mentioned about that, Eurasian Economic Union. Some also many of them are members of CARIC, what we call the Central Asia Economic Regional Cooperation. And also we have other important initiatives, right? Like One Belt, One Road, and together with many others. So how we region use this opportunity to build that physical connectivities, transport connectivity, and later economically interconnected, integrated. So that's something we have to address. This is something And secondly, we see many infrastructures still are not there to support private sector. Many infrastructure really were built many 20 or 30 years ago, before maybe during the former Soviet Union time. So how we rehabilitate and renovate the old facility like power plant, transmission line, and road and many others. So how can we build a very advanced infrastructure, road, energy system, and the urban infrastructure system there? Without the infrastructure, this hardware, you cannot expect the private sector to come, right? So And also in terms of policy side, software side, in terms of business environment, we see a big improvement, particularly if you look at their ease of doing business, right? So based on the statistics, we saw that many countries are improving their ease of doing business, particularly like for country for the Kazakhstan, right? Their current ranking is I think it's 41%. It's 41, right? The ranking. So among the 189 countries, they can further improve. Maybe they can become top 30 in terms of ease of doing business if more efforts can be made. So I see, but still we see many room for the improvement, big room for the improvement further to improve, the regulatory firm policy environment for the private sector development. So I think, and also, we look at the capital market, the financial sector, right? Particularly for the SME financing, we see still a lot of things we should do, right? So how can we improve the banking sector, financial system, capital market development, and SME financing? Those are things. If we cannot, they don't have. If the private sector cannot get the money they need, right? So how they develop their business, and also labor market issue. Also, I see that, right? We need, private sector need the labor. I think they need very sound, labor market institutions in place, and also we should see, that also the mobility of laborers, right? If needed, within the country, even among the countries, and also that, and also we want to see that, that the labor skills to be further improved, through training, through education, vocational training, these kind of things. So still a lot of work, needed to be done. I see from our perspective, from Asian Development Bank's perspective, we see. So I just give you, maybe we still have many other, barriers on the constraint, right, for the development of private sector. But given such an important role for the future growth, for the region. So how can we address that? Mattia, you also asked me, what are solutions to them? I think certainly firstly we, at the country level, each country should do, speed up structural reform. And we can do many things, right? We can take many policies by the government, right? Improve the business environment. And, reducing red tape, administrative, try to improve, that the administrative procedures, right? Simplifying, do more deregulation, try to improve the efficiency for approval of the setting up of the firm, and running the firms. And we also, see that, that we should also try to, introducing the dispute settlement mechanism and the timely arbitration of legal procedures. We also should try to improve the competition and abating the barrier to the market entry, by the enterprises, right? Still, we see in many countries in the region, state sector, right, still play a very dominant role. How you reform the SOE? How you try to, let the private sector can, get more entry to more sectors, right? So that they can play more important roles. Some countries, are talking about the privatization. They are doing some, maybe talk more about commercialization of SOE as a first step. So this, something also very important. How we, help to provide better assets to finance, particularly for those SME financing, and also I think how we, force the and managerial and technical skills, right, to the entrepreneurs. I visited one of the small SME we finance. I visited yesterday. Actually, two. I visited one child development center we finance through our SME financing. Another one is the ice cream production, businessman. I talked to him. I said, yes, I appreciate ADB's support for the loan, but I need more now about how can I run a business? How can I build my marketing, system? I don't know how to further expand my business in the country or even in the region. So they need more like that kind of managerial, knowledge, right? So it's not just about money. It's also about how we, provide trainings, educations, right, for entrepreneurs. And also we need to try to provide more vocational training, technical education for our laborers. So they could be also very competitive. They could meet the needs of market. So, and also, okay, we should also try to improve the corporate governance so many things we can do, but also I want to see, at the country level, structural reform is the key for development of private sector. And also, with the structural reform, we can address those issues I mentioned to you. And also, we can address these diversification issues. If we can, promote structural reform, I think the country in the region will have more diversified economy, right? Many countries rely on only very few sectors. They need more sector, right, for the growth. But how can we, identify those sectors and let the private sector, together with the public sector, right, work together to promote those potential industries, manufacturing sector, service sectors, agro-processing business, sectors. So a lot of things I have not yet seen the solution. But at the regional level, I also want to say that we need to strengthen cooperation. Many colleagues talk about, Silk Road, EU cooperation, and my EIB and also Eurasian development. Talk about, ADB also, supported this regional cooperation integration for many years, I can tell you. Particularly in the region, we through this CARIC, Central Asia Economic Cooperation Forum, right? We have 10 members within this CARIC Central Asia Economic Cooperations. So we did a lot, for the transport, development, energy project, and trade policy dialogue, trade facilitation. In the coming years, we also want to even further promote, the economic corridor development. Try to transform the transport corridor into the trade corridor, and finally to become an economic corridor. So you see, with that corridor, economic corridor in place, with more integration in the region, right, you will see more business opportunity for private sector, right? Along the corridor, and you'll see more regional trade and investment with trade policy, trade facilitation here, and infrastructure here. You'll see more movement of goods, people, services, right, capital. So I just let you know that. So with that kind of regional integration cooperation, we can make a difference for promotion of the private sector at the country level, at the regional level. So this really will promote the economic growth in our member countries and for our region, and also for the global economy. So, but certainly for ADB's role, I can tell you, that we will continue to support all of these kind of structural reforms, infrastructure development, regional cooperation integration. I think we have been working with others. Certainly we cannot do this alone. I see that many countries in the region, I visit many countries in the region, I see that in the recent years, they want us to support more PPP projects. I met with the decision makers. They said, Mr. Zhang, I want you to do more PPP projects in my country, in the different sectors. I want you to do more private sector operation in my country. You see, that kind of changes. I saw that in the recent years. So this is a very good, momentum, right? So ADB will try to do more private sector operation, try to promote PPP project. And also we'll try to provide more policy-based loan and investment projects, support structural reform, infrastructure development also. Like the one in the country, Kazakhstan, we support SME financing, right? And we support, policy loan for Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and other countries for improving the business environment, investment and climate, right, for the private sector development. So we will also, right, try to promote regional initiatives. So they make the Central Asia, that really benefit from this transit, very important position for the transit, I think the cooperation, particularly between Asia and Europe, and also between the Central Asia and South Asia, between the Central Asia and Western Asia, Central Asia and East Asia. So I think that's something. But certainly, we see that countries are doing their regional cooperation, their bilateral cooperation. They do also need to make sure, whatever they do, also they should be in line with the multilateral effort, like the WTO, right? That role and regulation, right? So that we can, see the complementarities. I'm quite sure EU member country also, some of them also WTO, if not all, right? I think they are also WTO members also. So certainly they also will, follow WTO's role of regulations. And certainly I want to also encourage our member countries to not only participate actively in regional, sub-regional cooperation and bilateral cooperation, but also, join actively for this multilateral trade and investment efforts, particularly like, WTO. So we also will provide our support together with others. But certainly, our Eurasian Development Bank said, we ADB, Asian Development Bank, we cannot do alone. We will work closely with other development partners, with government, with private sector, right? With the new banks like AIB and new, other, financial institutions, existing one and new one. I can tell you, we are going to have a first co-financing with the AIB in June, very soon, for one project in the highway sectors. So this is a kind of example I can show you. We Asian Development Bank, right? We will, like to work with other banks, particularly even the new development bank for infrastructure development in the region. So that I just give example. So we are ready to working with all the others to support our, regions, our countries, economic and social development. So maybe I use too much of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't resist to tell you that, of course, we beat you on the project with the AIIB because we signed the first one just 2 weeks ago for Tajikistan. I have to put a little bit of competition between the IFIs, otherwise what's the fun? But you actually did lay out perfectly the challenges for our next speakers, because at one point you said that we don't have all the solutions, but we are quite good at diagnosing what the problems are, which is typical traits of economists. Peter, if you didn't know, we tend to do that a lot, economists. We diagnose very well, but we don't know all the solutions. And I think for this region, you laid out a number of serious challenges, from attracting private sector to improving the business environment, reforming SOEs, creating the skills which are required for the transformation that we see. We have a new kid on the block, and the new kid is the Silk Road Fund. It's a very important fund, $40 billion of capital created only a couple of years ago with the objective of creating that connectivity we were talking about. Now, Madame Zhu, you're managing director of the Silk Road Fund. You heard the scale of the challenges that we are facing. Could you give us a little bit your perspective of what the solutions may look like? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to attend the Astana Economic Forum on behalf of the Silk Road Fund and discuss with you issues on business investment and development. I think the building and development of the Belt and Road has brought new opportunities for development of current business environment, and the Silk Road Fund is committed to support such development. As you know, more than 2 millennia ago, our forefathers explored and opened up several routes of trade and cultural exchanges that linked the major civilizations of Asia, Europe, and Africa, collectively called the Silk Road by later generations. These exchanges, cooperations, and mutual learning contributed greatly to the prosperity of the East and the West. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative on its visit to Central Asia and Southeast Asia, encouraging the building of a new regime and system on regional cooperation for mutual benefit and common development. The initiative, highlighting that policy coordination facilitates connectivity and impeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people bonds should be promoted, provides us with hard-won opportunities to improve connectivity. Kazakhstan, a country along the Asian Silk Road, made great contributions to connecting the civilizations in the East and the West and boost their culture, economic, and trade cooperation. China is its second largest trade partner. The heads of state of the two countries thought highly of the development of the China-Kazakhstan relationship during their meeting in Beijing last year. They signed the joint declaration on new stage of comprehensive strategic partnership between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of Kazakhstan. In recent years, China and Kazakhstan have promoted the integration between the building of the Silk Road economic belt and Kazakhstan's new economic policy of the Bright Road, which has produced positive results. As you know, under such circumstances, establishing the Silk Road Fund became a natural choice. On November the 8th, 2014, President Xi Jinping announced that China would commit $40 billion to the establishment of the Silk Road Fund. Incorporated in Beijing at the end of December 2014, the Silk Road Fund is a medium to long-term development and investment fund. Through a variety of equity-oriented investment and financing options, the fund invests in areas such as infrastructure, resources and energy development, industrial cooperation, and financial cooperation, and is dedicated to promote the economic and social development of China and the countries along the Belt and Road and the connectivity between them. Since its foundation over a year ago, the Silk Road Fund has achieved sustainable progress in project investment. And until now, we have finished 3 project investments. And ladies and gentlemen, last year, the Silk Road Fund just started its operation. And this year, we are looking forward to partner with you and jointly contribute to the global business investment and development. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Zhu. It's actually very encouraging to see that the principles of the Silk Road Funds are principles of cooperation and involvement of the private sector, which we heard from many others. We talked a lot about the private sector, but actually none of us work for the private sector. So it'd be actually interesting to hear from the horse's mouth what are the challenges that the private sector faces in this region and what can be done about it, what's needed, what can we do as international institutions, government officials, what can we do to facilitate private sector investment? And nobody can help us do that better than Robert Vartevanian, who is the head of M&A and financing for KPMG. So Robert, can you give us your perspective? Thank you.
Certainly will try. Good morning, everybody, and it's nice to be back. It was a year ago when I spoke at the conference and very much enjoyed it. I want to start actually with a quote, and I'd like you to keep this in mind as I then raise a couple of points for possibly further discussion. A very well-known CEO of an extremely large financial institution said that private capital goes where it is welcome, but it stays where it's well looked after. And while you're thinking about the implications of that, let me mention 2 areas: global population growth and competition for capital, and then the huge and significant One Belt, One Road initiative. So first of all, population growth. Well, if I stick to my 3 or 4 minutes, I can tell you that the global population will have gone up another 450. The length of this conference, it will have gone up 15,000. Every week, it rises 1.5 million. And since the last time I was in this podium, the population of the world increased by the size of Iran or Germany. And Iran is actually very topical for the next point, which is about competition for capital. Competition for capital, private capital, is global. But as has already been mentioned, people always focus on financial capital, forgetting about human capital. And that is absolutely key. Without the human capital, the financial capital will not follow, and that is a very important point, whether it's at the state enterprise level or at the private level. People, quality, education, and experience of how to use the capital is absolutely fundamental. The change, because I said this last year, the change from last year, ironically, is that, and I think Dmitry mentioned this earlier, there is a real hunger for good bankable projects. So whilst the challenge is huge, there is also a lot of capital, and they are looking for good bankable infrastructure projects. And the problem is finding those. Let me just say that, again, it is not about the capital. It is about risk. If you think about risk, perceived or real, the capital will come if the risk sharing and risk allocation is appropriately split or dealt with. Let me briefly move on to One Belt, One Road in this first piece. I've already said that China's initiative is hugely significant, but I think, at least we believe, it brings with it responsibilities for China in particular. And we think the best projects, the ones most likely to get early traction, are ones that are win-win. Win for China, win for the country, the other country involved, or the countries involved. Also, we believe that it'll be key to earn what we would call a social license to operate. That would be things like a good working environment, contributing to communities, and minimizing carbon footprint. And in fact, it could involve infrastructure that doesn't directly benefit China, like healthcare, education, and housing. And obviously this creates opportunities for local players who can bring their local expertise and knowledge, relationships, contacts to bear. And when I look at the private sector and the opportunities within One Belt, One Road, and we can again talk about them more detail later if necessary, I see primary opportunities, typically within the construction of infrastructure. Then there will be secondary opportunities, which are both during the build of the infrastructure and then operating the infrastructure afterwards. And then what I would describe as tertiary opportunities, which are the wider opportunities in community. And that could be in country or through opening up trade westwards and eastwards. And those, I think, can be quite transforming. So, I would say that whilst it is fair to comment that not all the initiatives yet are fully aligned, I think we've heard that everyone wants that alignment. But it is a huge opportunity for Kazakhstan to accelerate its reintegration into a wider global trading community. And I think Kazakhstan must do all that it can to seize the opportunity, not to be marginalized, but in fact, rather to be in the middle once again. And probably everyone in this room has a responsibility to make sure that that latter happens. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. I can't resist picking up the point you made at the very end of your intervention, and turn to Peter to ask for his historical perspective again on one question, which is facing reality. This region of the world at the moment is not at the center of the world. Working for the EBRD, when I work on Central Asia, sometimes I feel like a medical doctor working on rare diseases, because so few people actually look at some of the countries in Central Asia. Kazakhstan is perhaps the exception, is the country that is perhaps looked at the most in this region, but Tajikistan, Kyrgyz Republic, these are countries that are very rarely sort of talked about in international financial institutions, let alone by the private sector. So, Peter, what happened? Why does this region, which was at the heart of the world for so many years, why did it fall into the shadows? And are the signs that we are seeing now, like the establishment of the Astana International Financial Center, the focus on Kazakhstan, the investments we see, are they the first signs that this bear is waking up again?
Well, it's a good question. I'll answer it, I suppose, as quickly as I can, which is that the rise of the West was triggered by sudden access to bullion and capital from the Americas. And that recycling of a financial system of silver and gold, in particular coming out of Central America and South America, was used, not all of it entirely efficiently. Some of it was built on cultural monuments that make Europe such a wonderful destination to visit and live in. But a lot of that money was recycled to use very efficiently in what we would call private investment today into parts of the world like India and China in particular, where the control on access to resources and then control over resources was absolutely central. And that process has kept shifted the injection of capital away from Central Asia and into regions that were closer accessed to the sea, as we've heard already before, but also allowed trading positions to reroute and use money efficiently. And that's something that all of you have mentioned something about, that recycling. That hunger for projects to invest into is no different in the olden days. What the key difference was that the disconnect between the resources of this region, for example, of Central Asia, and sea routes and the ability to get goods to market changed fundamentally. So the reason why this region has been less talked about is because of the emergence of much bigger trade routes. Now that will, of course, change, but just I want to pick up on something which is linked to that too, which is this hunger for projects. Of course, the challenge for places like Kazakhstan and Central Asia is to pick the right kind of investor. And with the different interests of those sitting on the panel up here, of course, the long term is not just to find money for a good project, it's to find the right investor. And what we're very bad at doing, I think, in the West is joining the dots and seeing that there are longer term consequences. So, for example, the major investments that are being made and proposed on the One Belt, One Road into Pakistan, for example, into the port of Gwadar and so on, will have very significant long-term implications for the Kashmir, for relations with Iran, for how India develops. And these, we can't look at individual projects that are good ones on their own. A whole region worked into a not just Central Asian context, but into the context of what the longer-term future of a much, much broader area. As we heard, it's not a big population base here, 70 million, but when we connect Iran, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, we're starting to look at something coming up to about 20 to 25% of the world's population. So this is an important junction point, and the story of the Silk Roads was about these hubs, about these places where multiple actors are interested in colliding. And Kazakhstan's challenge, I think, is to retain some form of independence that allows it not just to chase soft money or good money lent by institutions like the EIB or EBRD, but to try to fit them into a master plan. Because the story of the Silk Road, the story of global trade, is that you need to calibrate all the interests and not allow an overwhelming investment, for example, from the Silk Road Fund, which threatens to solve today's problems but raise problems for the future.
Thanks, Peter. The audience have been very patient, and I'd like to ask them to come in now with questions. But before we do that, I think there's roaming microphones around. But before we do that, I can't resist to turn to the EIB for a second, which is the Bank of the European Union. Now, the European Union, let's face it, is in crisis. Brexit, a lack of confidence in the European institutions is now very widespread in Europe. It's quite a profound crisis. Now, how does the European Union, the EIB in this case, see the move of the axis towards the East and the increasing role of China in this region? Is it a threat or is it an opportunity for Europe? How do you see it, Jan?
I think certainly it's an easy question. It's certainly an opportunity, not a threat. But let me elaborate a little bit on that European point of view. I mean, EIB is by far the biggest IFI in the world. The total lending of us was roughly 80 billion euros last year, most of that in Europe. However, we only stand for 3% of the total amount of investments in Europe. And that's Europe only. My point is not that the MDBs can't solve the issue, even if that's true, but that we need partnerships. We need partnerships between East and West. We need partnerships between countries, between MDBs, between public and private, between everyone. What we are thinking in Europe at the moment is some kind of paradigm shift also concerning the role of MDBs. We are used to measure our success in the total volumes of our lending. But I don't think that's the right way to do it. It should be the measurement of the total amount of investment we are able to mobilize. And that's, by the way, the great idea behind the so-called Juncker plan. It's not the question of how much money we put in an investment, but how much private money we are able to mobilize. And I think this is the key issue. And in order to be successful in this one, you really need to understand the logics of the private sector.
Could I just comment on that, actually? I think this is absolutely the critical point, and the multiplier effect and the leverage that the MDBs can bring to the market and therefore attract private capital. In our discussions with private investors, it is not that they do not want to invest, and they do not see risk as one word. There are many, many risks in a project. You will all know them. Some of the risks naturally should lie with the private sector, and some with the public sector, and some, you know, you can argue about. And if the MDBs can be that enabler and focus on the risks which the private sector, perceived or otherwise, just will not accept, then that would be a huge step forward in multiplying the capital available.
Thanks, Robert. Let's see if the audience, people in the audience have any questions for our panelists on this topic or on other topics. Any questions? Just put your hand up and the microphone will come to you. I'm giving it a bit of time because people are shy. Yes, up front here. If you could introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Giovanni Capannelli. I'm from the Asian Development Bank. I have a question for the European Investment Bank, in particular with regard to metrics that you are now proposing for assessing the impact of IDBs on economic growth. I'm wondering whether we should introduce also some kind of other metrics that pertain more into the realm of job creation. We are in a region that has been now suffering from external shocks since, you know, price of commodities have been going down from mid of 2014. Lots of the countries in the region have been suffering, growth has been declined, and lots of jobs have been lost. And we are in Kazakhstan, which is a, you know, net import of foreign workers. But if you go to Kyrgyzstan, to Tajikistan, you have a completely reverse situation where lots of people who migrated to Russia, now they are going back to their countries and they don't have a job, and they don't have more remittances to send back to, you know, the countries. I was wondering whether job creation could also be another metric in measuring IDB's implication for economic growth.
It certainly is, and it has always been. We used to define EIB within the European audience that we are a public bank. Our mission is not to maximize profit, but to contribute to EU objectives, economic growth and job creation being the most important of them. The MDBs certainly have we have many roles. As my colleague from NPB already mentioned, we are providing not only money, we are providing a quality stamp for several projects. We are providing technical assistance, advisory. We are helping in the identification, prioritization, preparation and implementation of projects and so on. So we really have several roles. But of course, you always need to remember that being a public institution, the final goal should be the real impact in the real economy. And of course, job creation is then not the only one, but among the most important one of them. And at least for us, and I'm sure that that is also the case for all the other MDBs, job creation, sound economic growth, but then also contributing to climate action and other important issues is in the core of our businesses.
Thank you very much. Before I turn back to the audience, I wanted to ask perhaps a question that is could be at best answered by Tatyana and Dmitry. Eurasian Economic Union, Eurasian Commission, your scope is, in a way, to wake up this sleeping bear of Central Asia and put it back at the center of the world. And you have a certain amount of tools at your dispositions to do it. Some of them are soft tools. We talked earlier about the business environment, improving alignment of regulatory frameworks, and so on and so forth. Some others are more legal tools, treaties that allow for trading of goods, services, but also people across the region more freely. Could you give us your perspective on which ones of your tools do you think are the ones which would be most important to put the region back at the center of the world?
Well, I think all the tools we have in the Union are extremely important. Eurasian Economic Union is about building single markets, providing for freedoms, freedom of movement of goods, services, capitals, and people. And we already now, in the year 2016, have practically full freedom of movement of goods. We do not have any customs duties, we do not have any customs frontiers or customs checks. And we practically, in all spheres, have single regulation, which is very important in order to provide a free circulation of goods. We have single regulation in technical sphere, technical regulation, veterinary sphere, sanitary measures, customs administration, etc. We have very few regional markets where we do not have custom duties, but where we do have national regulations. And these are very important for the region. This is market in oil, gas, oil products, pharmaceuticals, and some other, electrical energy. And we do have a roadmap when, even in this sensitive market, we will have unified supranational union legislation. Pharmaceuticals, this year, 2016. Electrical energy, the year 2019. Oil and gas, no later than 2025. And we think it's of crucial importance for investors. Because, for example, if investor comes now to Kazakhstan and invests into pharmaceuticals, 2 years ago, he thought that his pharmaceuticals will be able to circulate freely only in Kazakhstan, in a market of 15 million of consumers. In order to go to Russia or Belarus, you don't have to pay customs duties, but you need to come with a new license, registration, etc. Difficult and long process. Starting this year, everything will be unified. You produce here, you can circulate freely all around the union. And we think it's of crucial importance for attracting investors. And we already see, for example, in Kazakhstan, as a result of a Eurasian Economic Union and the Customs Union, which came into force in the year 2010, already, for example, automobile industry was created, because now it's a market of 180 billion people. We are building now single market in services. Half of our service volume is already within this regime of a single market, and the other half, non-discrimination regime. We already have a single market for labor force. Citizens of all our countries, I mean 5 countries, can work whenever they want, and they can't be discriminated. We already have a certain degree of mobility of capital. Practically, it depends on the national legislation. But by the year 2025, we plan to establish common financial market. And that means that we will unify certain spheres of our legislation, and we will also have a supranational financial regulator, which will be established here in Kazakhstan. And our vision of this market is that by the year 2025, for example, a bank which is established here in Kazakhstan, maybe with foreign investors, etc., having a license from a central bank of Kazakhstan, will be able to provide services all around the Union without obtaining additional licenses from Central Bank of Russia or Belarus. So we think that really Eurasian Economic Union has lots of instruments already, but in 10 years' time we'll have more instruments. And that really, I think, provides possibility for attracting capital, both private and public.
Thank you very much. Dmitry, you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mattia. Maybe just, some words. You made very serious question how to, let's say, wake up bears sleeping in our region. And, I was very impressed last year at the Astana Economic Forum, President Nazarbayev's speech. What he told, that it's not just enough to restructure economy, to make good loans on, let's say, PPP, or to have stable monetary policy. It's not enough. Biggest question, how to change society. Still we have here in many countries, society based on, let's say, 19th or 20th century approach. So family style business, redistribution of power and property using administrative mechanism, promotion based again on family, do you belong to this family or another family? And it's necessary to completely change society, to create new dynamic society based on merit-based approach, market economy. And here, this is the biggest challenge, how to change people, how to change people behavior. And so answer will be, if our country could change society, our country will have success.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there's any more questions from the audience. Any question? Please put your hand up and a microphone will come to you. Okay, as you think about your questions, I do have one. It's a bit of a tough question, but unless you ask tough questions, you don't resolve tough issues, which is for Madame Zhu. So you were called into question by Peter already and by others on the overall strategy of the Silk Road Fund and its investment. So there's an issue there, but there's another question that relates to that, which is the modality of these investments. What we've seen in the past decades is investments outside China, particularly the investments that were pursued by some of the shareholders of the Silk Road Fund, such as the China Development Bank or Exim Bank, came with a very strong Chinese component. This being Chinese subcontractors, or this being Chinese labor. There was sort of associated with this project. I do know that the Silk Road Fund has to have a certain Chinese component in its investment. But what is the character of this Chinese component? How will the Silk Road Fund consider this Chinese element of its investment going forward, similarly to what has been done over the last couple of decades? Or are we going to see a different approach of Chinese investments abroad?
Thank you very much for your very good question, and thank you for your paying much attention to the Silk Road Fund. And yes, you are right. We pay much attention to the Chinese characters while we making our investment. But probably it's easier for you to understand this question by starting introducing more about our characteristics. While we were established, we followed 5 characteristics. First is we have a diversified equity structure, and the initial capital of $10 billion of our fund comes from the SAFE and Investment Corporation and Exim Bank and CDB. And second, we followed the diversified investment destinations. And the One Belt, One Road countries and regions are our key regions. but our investment has no regional limitation. We can invest globally. And the third, we have the diversified areas of investment that I have already introduced. For instance, infrastructure, communication, and financial, energy, and resources, and capacity, industry capacity. But that's no limitation for us for that. And fourth, we have diversified investment vehicles. We can invest in equity. We can also invest in loan and fund. We can also manage entrusted assets and commission others to invest. And fifth, we have diversified partnership. We would like to work and cooperate with enterprises and financial institutions, both in China and abroad, and also international financial organizations. Our investment principles are connectivity, economic return, cooperation, and openness. That means Chinese element is important for us, but we also focus on our investment philosophy. The two investment philosophy of ours is our investment should follow or suitable to the strategies of the countries related to our investments, including China and other countries. And the other one is these projects should be profitable. So these two are key elements for us. If the projects are suitable to our investment philosophy, then we can do that. And probably you have known we have already published 3 projects. And the first one is in Pakistan. We invest a hydropower plant with 3 Gorges Corporation. And the other one is we buy shares and also loans to the Pirelli Thai in Italy. And the third one is we buy shares and also loan to the Yamal LNG project in Russia. And these projects align with the Silk Road Fund's investment philosophy are the typical cases of our attempts. That's in green field development, merger and acquisition in global markets, and also supporting energy development and production capacity cooperation. And besides that, we concentrate quite a lot in Central Asia, especially Kazakhstan. And last year, we have already established the China and Kazakhstan capacity production fund. That's $2 billion. And we have already established a working team. And the projects in this special fund was proposed by both sides. And we hope we can have our project finished soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is a very reassuring answer. It does sound like a really new way of doing business compared to some of the practices that we saw in the past in China. But a specific question, if you can answer it. For instance, in Pakistan, where I know you're considering co-investing with the IFC, will you have your own environmental standards and procurement rules, or will you rely on your partner, in this case the IFC, for environmental standards and procurement rules? Will it be parallel, or will it be really a joint effort that will use their standards?
Thank you very much for your good question. I think while we are making our investments, we are independent. But because we are new and we just have 1 year old, and we need time to get acquaintance with the market. And as other gentleman has said, there's opportunities now in the world, but also risks very high in the world. So if there's other very competitive investors involved in, then probably we can share our experience and share our benefits, profits, and also our risks. So we communicate with other institutions, especially the international institutions like FC and also EBRD, Asian Bank, closely. And we hope we can benefit all together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. We are at the end of our time. We do have one question. Oh, yes, I see it. Yeah.
Добрый всем день, Нуржан Алимухамбетов. Как известно, деньги любят тишину, бизнес комфорт. И вот те движения, о которых вы говорите, они ведут к тому, чтобы объединять усилия, координацию, сотрудничество, достижение международных проектов и так далее. Но в то же время мы в мире наблюдаем ситуацию, когда идет серьезное разобщение в части экономических интересов, политических интересов, религиозных интересов и так далее. Это два взаимоисключающих процесса. Хотелось бы спросить, как вы видите перспективу, если точка смыкания, и какой процесс будет преобладать, потому что в итоге тот процесс, который будет важнее, он и поведет мир в ту сторону развития, которая там видится за этим. Спасибо.
I like when easy questions come at the end like this. I'm not sure whether anybody wants to address it. Peter will need to do it because the historical perspective needs to come. Sorry? Okay. But let's have this question first because I liked it. I thought it was very challenging. Peter, you want to give us your historical perspective of this diverging and mutually exclusive sort of trends, if you want? Are they really mutually exclusive? Are they new?
I've learned my limitations, which is to be able to look backwards in time. I have some certainty. I think what's very difficult is to predict where we are. And I think, like I said in my talk, one of the difficulties is that Astana looks very different, and the questions that are being answered today look different than they did 24 months ago. If we were sitting here in 12 months' time and there's a very speedy recovery in commodities pricing, people will take a very different view, I think, on both on looking back on these immediate trends, but also in terms of what capacity and what problems that multinational banks will be trying to solve. So I think it's very difficult to try to answer these questions with an immediacy. But having said that, I think that there are inevitabilities about looking at where resources are based, looking at where the big strategic interests are specifically of China, which has taken a very bullish view, potentially a very positive one, across this region, and how countries of this region retain their independences is, I think, the primary way in which investment takes place is going to be benchmarked and measured in the future. These are questions, I think, that multinational bank economists understand much better than I do. I think the only thing I would say as a historian is that central hubs flourish and are successful, like Kazakhstan will be, if they're able to keep enough oxygen and keep enough other actors involved in this region. And that means that the motivations of private sector investors, multinational banks, state-led banks, need to be weighed very, very carefully and need to be considered very carefully. Exactly who invests is not just about return on capital, it's about finding the right partnerships. Some of that risk, seems to me, can be protected by involving this approach of multiple agencies. I think what we forget from the point of view of the EBRD and the EIB, we are not neighbours to this region. we never have been neighbours to this region, and we won't be neighbours to this region. And so our attempt to build and reconstruct and develop, which is the name of Mattia's bank, a reconstruction and development bank, looks very different to the kind of mutual long-term gains that are potential here across a forming Eurasian Union, across China, looking increasingly across into Central Asia as well. How those questions are handled means that the engagement of the politicians and the bankers in Kazakhstan and in its neighboring countries is absolutely fundamental. So those themes, I think, if you would like a good book about it, I can recommend one. That's mine. But I think that the key question is how to retain as many people interested in this region as possible. And if I was a Kazakh, if I was advising the Kazakh government, I would say the more I had people coming from Beijing, from Luxembourg, from London, from Moscow, the better. The more people I can get engaged. And I would also want to have people from other neighboring states and from India, Pakistan, and Iran here as well. Kazakhstan will flourish, and the Silk Road's flourished where you have the bombardment of the maximum number of ideas, peoples, languages, and voices.
Thanks, Peter. I'm no historian, but I wanted to add one observation to the question. And your question was really based on the premises that there's incompatibility between a trend of integration, new treaties, and so on and so forth, and the trends of contrast and differences in views which are driven by politics or religion. Well, actually, if you think about the history of Europe, the period in which Europe flourished the most was probably, or in the recent history, is probably the period after the Second World War, while Europe was an absolute hotspot for divergence in politics, in religion, and in views. At the same time, it was the period in which the European Union, as we know it today, was created through very complex treaties and alignment of interests. So I'm not entirely sure that the two are incompatible, that you can't achieve and resolve some of the differences through processes that create stronger integration. We are eating into the coffee break, so I'm aware that we're a bit out of time, but perhaps we can take one more question if you bear with us, since we started a little earlier. There was another question somewhere here. Yes, this gentleman. Last question for you.
Сагадиев, Казахстан. Я не буду задавать вопросов, я хотел бы высказать несколько суждений, если вы позволите. Мы прежде всего благодарны всем участникам экономического форума в нашем государстве. Тут за 2 дня высказаны были много идей, очень хороших идей, они весьма полезны и для Казахстана, и для всего региона, наверное, ну и они полезны и для мирового экономического процесса. Особенно нас импонирует обсуждение идеи Великого Шелкового пути. Это то историческое наследие, которое на многие века сохранилось в памяти нашего народа. И благодаря этому шелковому пути мы в одно время были очень процветающими странами, не только Казахстан, но и весь этот прилегающий регион. Поэтому обсуждение этого вопроса нас очень-очень интересует. И те идеи, которые вы высказали, мы очень надеемся на то, что дадут новый мощный толчок развитию этого великого проекта. Ну и 2 таких замечания, уважаемые коллеги. Мне, например, не совсем удобно слышать, когда участники этого форума говорят, что надо разбудить этот регион. Смею вас заверить, этот регион не спит. 25 лет он начинается активным строительством нового общества. Вы это все прекрасно знаете. И поэтому не совсем корректно, когда такие вещи у нас случаются. Это некий менторский тон, который нельзя воспринимать нам, казахстанцам, активно ищущим свои пути в этом мировом процессе. Это первое. Второе. Вот мы много говорим о качестве институтов. Совершенно правильно. У нас очень слабые институты, мы их сейчас преобразовываем. Во всяком случае, пытаемся их преобразовывать, модернизировать и так далее, и так далее. Но есть же ведь международные институты. Всемирная торговая организация, международные валютно-кредитные отношения. Почему там не происходит каких-то серьезных изменений? Ведь в национальных границах мы можем решать свои проблемы. Это правильно, мы должны. Вот здравоохранение, образование, ну и много других вещей. Но мы связаны, тесно связаны с мировой экономикой, с процессами глобализации, международными валютно-кредитными отношениями, с правилами Всемирной торговой организации. Но почему-то эти процессы, в общем-то, они сейчас стагнируют, они, или, я не знаю, обсуждаются или не обсуждаются, но, в общем-то, они не решаются. 15 лет тому назад, если я не ошибаюсь, в Катаре, в Дохе, 33 развивающие страны предложили очень серьезные предложения с тем, чтобы уравнять правила торговли в масштабе Всемирной торговой организации. Было много обещаний сделать это, много прошло после этого в министерской конференции, но мы же еще ничего не сделали. И, кстати сказать, это одно из серьезных препятствий тому, чтобы вот эти развивающие страны, в том числе и наша страна, развивались должным образом. Второе, международные валютно-кредитные отношения. Я помню, когда вот кризис случился 7-9 годов, я говорю 7-го, потому что вот этот ипотечный кризис одним из первых пришел в Казахстан. Может быть, где-то с 8-го года началось, а у нас с 7-го года. Так вот, тогда был очень серьезный проект, по-моему, Организация Объединенных Наций, там создала какую-то комиссию, пересмотреть Бреттон-Вудское соглашение, сделать валютные финансовые отношения или такую архитектуру, которая бы способствовала современным условиям, современным потребностям. Вот эта комиссия работала, там еще много других комиссий работало. Я вот вижу, что и комитет создан по Бреттон-Вудсу, но пока что движений еще мало. И, кстати сказать, вот нерешенность этих некачественной работы этих международных институтов, я хочу сказать, они и мешают в определенной степени, конечно, не полностью, но в определенной степени мешают и развитию развивающихся стран, в том числе и Казахстана. Спасибо.
Thank you very much for sharing your views. We know this is a big debate, which is being debated in many of the capitals of the world. I think on this panel we do have a diversity of institutions where Kazakhstan and other countries are well represented. But I do agree with you that this is an area where much further work is needed. Now this brings us to an end. If there's no last words from our panelists, I'm looking around if anybody wants to add something before we break. Well, then it remains to me to say thanks to Peter for his keynote intervention, and thanks to all the panelists for this very exciting hour and a half we spent together. Thank you.